good thing coming, and it's all I need. Everything I wanted.
I hope it's everything you wanted. That's always my hope and dream on this thing, is that it's everything you all want and you all hope for. But what are we talking about today?
Bitcoin hardware. We want the download. We want the update.
Nice.
JD, you are very familiar and close to this stuff because you have some connections, let's just say, that put you in privy conversations. And so we wanted to try and have
Folks.
yeah, I want to try and see like what's happening on the inside. What's the Bitcoin hardware stuff? Obviously, hardware is a part of the Bitcoin world and a part of the Bitcoin ecosystem, and it's very important. Bitcoin mining needs hardware. Bitcoin nodes need hardware, and without these things, we don't have Bitcoin. So,
Yep.
I don't know.
There's also
JD, you want to?
Good.
You want to start with just a high level overview? Actually, probably it might even be good to just talk about the basics of like, what are the different types of hardware, and then what's happening in those spaces.
Yeah, I think we can do that. And I think we kind of even need to go one layer up higher. And if you guys have any more insight on the like power grid side of it, because there's a bunch of different pieces. And I think the beginning of it is, if people aren't aware, actually kind of like the energy money is what I'm going to call Bitcoin idea, actually originated from Henry Ford. And I believe it was in like 1940 whenever he wrote the article. It was an article in the New York Times. I can try and find it. But he essentially posited this idea of an energy-based money, hashtag Bitcoin. And so it took a while, but it was interesting because he was thinking about this. And what he posited in his article was, if you have a money that's backed by energy, or a currency that's backed by energy, which is something that's finite based on physics, because you have to have conservation of mass and all that stuff, wars would end. That's literally what he posited back in the day, was you would have wars end because you can't fund these endless things forever if you have a currency that's actually based on something. And so flash forward to now, where we have the tariff war going on, where we have the centralization of not just Bitcoin mining, but the centralization of manufacturing, period. The people don't realize that the largest manufacturer of semiconductors in the world is a company called TMCI, which is basically Taiwan, like silicon manufacturing company. And I think it's TSM. They did just announce that they're opening a plant, I believe, somewhere in Texas. But if you take China, so mainland China and then Taiwan, those two entities, and merge them together, which this is actually why everybody always talks about Taiwan. Like, why is Taiwan so important? Because Taiwan, as a small island in the Pacific Ocean, equates to, I believe, 56% of all silicon production in the world. They're the largest manufacturers of silicon.
Yeah.
Then if you take China, mainland, so you take mainland China and silicon and Taiwan and merge those two together, that equates to like 94%, something like that. It's in the 90s% of all manufacturers of silicon in the entire world. Why is that important? Because at the end of the day, if you don't have silicon, these things don't work. And the issue with that is we become so dependent as a culture and as a society on silicon manufacturing. The biggest risk we have in terms of society, not just Bitcoin, is the centralization of the manufacturing of those chips, because now we're in this tariff war with China, which is doing wonders to kind of remove a lot of the inflation. We're actually seeing deflation in the market. But the big issue that we're seeing, to go to your actual original question, is we're now getting an understanding, though, of the danger we're in when it comes to the centralization of the manufacture of chips, not just for cars and for computers and for all that stuff, but the centralization of chips for ASICs, for Bitcoin. China just said yesterday, which again, we don't have proof of this, but they said they just sold 15,000 Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I personally don't believe it. Show me the UTXO, show me the transaction. But the reason that is actually super interesting, which now plays back into the hardware thing, is hardware and software are really difficult to reverse engineer, but hardware is even harder, because if you can get software, you can kind of poke and prod at it really quickly. If you have a computer, you can kind of look at it, you can open it, you can look under the hood. Hardware is not that way. Think of hardware as a gated thing, where if you send water down a hill, it's going down that hill. It's really hard to push water up the hill to try and see where it flows. Because like if you push the water down the hill, you see it goes in all the different like crevices and does all that. But you can't really push the water back up the hill. So if you're trying to reverse engineer it, it's a lot more difficult to find hardware backdoors. So like Scott and the BitAxe guys are doing a lot of really good reverse engineering. That's actually how they made BitX work, and they're kind of putting all that out there. But being able to find a backdoor, which a backdoor, if you're familiar with the term, if you've heard the term, a software or a hardware backdoor would allow you to put something into the hardware or the software that would give you complete control over it. One of the things I think it was on Rogan or Tucker the other day, and it's been kind of going viral on the internet, is the Department of Homeland Security when somebody was importing a power grid. So to manage the electrical grid, they have these giant transformers. Somebody brought in the transformer from China, and the DoD caught wind of something. And what they caught wind of was this particular grid thing had a hardware backdoor in it, i.e. China could turn off, thank you, camera, for freezing. China could turn off this piece of our power grid ad nauseum as they would want to do. And that thing goes into now what the bigger topic of this Bitcoin mining stuff, with the centralization of all of these ASIC chips being built in China, a nation that has been openly hostile towards Bitcoin by kicking all the miners out, back in the early.
Well, they've attempted to be hostile.
They've attempted, but
the problem is that Bitcoin has a higher level of game theory than they can engage
for
with.
sure. And so the
it's really just posturing. Right.
Landing the plane, though, is you have centralization of the manufacturing of these chips. We need to decentralize that. And that's honestly one of the biggest problems that we have. And personally, I think it would be interesting to see how we can get that here at LA. That's kind of where it is. And so I guess the question to open it up is, and I just kind of like went high level on like a bunch of different things, but hardware backdoors and then like militant nation states. Can Bitcoin survive that?
I mean, yes, but to even just like wrap that up into like a more digestible entry level kind of thing. What JD is talking about here is to mine Bitcoin, you need hardware, and that hardware needs to be manufactured. China presently manufactures most of that hardware. What did you say? 90%?
I think China is actually for when it comes to Bitcoin. So all silicon is like 90%. I believe when it comes to Bitcoin mining, it's like over 99%. Yeah, there are very few, if any, ASICs not manufactured in China.
So if there's the possibility of having a backdoor on a Bitcoin ASIC miner, then that can, for instance, with the Antbleed vulnerability, which I don't fully understand, but it's kind of a remote access kind of thing with like, hey, you can shut down somebody's miner from China because there was a vulnerability, a backdoor that they put into these miners. This happened years ago.
Actually, it happened again last week with the new firmware update in the S21 pluses. Yeah. So there's another interesting thing that's continuing to happen. Yeah. So essentially these hardware backdoors are real. We're starting to see that they're real, or rather it's seeming like it's plausible that they're real. And they're starting to be put in place. We'll put it that way. And so it's
they shut off just one miner. They used a backdoor to shut off one miner.
So no, there's a firmware update for the S21 Pro Plus, I think. And after people were doing this update, they were no longer allowed to mine on certain pools. And so their miners just would not connect to those pools. And so that's the kind of stuff that we're getting into is if an update is pushed and you just kind of are doing what you're doing, okay, cool, we need to do the newest update because it's got security bug fixes or whatever. Could you do an update that bricks your miner or rather restricts you from doing what you want to be doing? Because Antpool is the largest Bitcoin mining conglomerate, not just from hash rate, but from block template construction. Like there's a whole bunch of different things here, but hardware is specifically we want to talk about. But they legitimately did something, or rather it appears, we don't have proof yet, but it appears there is something that was done that is causing a ruckus with some people trying to mine on particular pools. and it's only after a software update, because the people who did the update on some of their machines and not others, the machines that were not updated are still able to mine on these other pools. So that's one of the issues that we're starting to see now is the game theory of, if China wants to win the Bitcoin war, they're going to war, and they're actually going to like start doing stuff like this to,
I mean,
to win.
hilariously, they've also just allegedly sold 15,000 Bitcoin for gold, right? So, I mean, they're interested in control, right? Any power structure is interested in control. So whether or not they believe that Bitcoin, that nobody can do anything about Bitcoin, they're still interested in the control. They want to control Bitcoin, right? Oh, well, you have fun with your Bitcoins, as Trump says, but we're still going to try and control that ecosystem.
Yep.
Now, the thing about Bitcoin is that nobody can control it. And the result of that is just straight up, well, we really don't like that we are manufacturing ASICs in China, so let's manufacture them in the US, or let's figure out a better, less controlled situation. I want to take ownership of that pipeline. I want to, figure out how I can solve that problem, how I can mitigate that risk, how I can reduce that exposure, right?
Yeah, I agree. I'm curious. This is definitely going to be a topic where I'm the one that needs it to be explained to them like they're 5. But to me, the hardware backdoor is such a bigger deal if you're running a node, if there was some way to manipulate nodes
Yeah.
at a large
Mhm.
scale, because the ability to prevent miners from mining just makes it more likely for a short period of time that other miners are going to get the Bitcoin instead, which doesn't actually threaten the system at all. It's a way to game razor thin odds. It's like pushing the casino in your favor a little bit.
Yeah.
In terms of a threat to Bitcoin, it's kind of a complete non sequitur to me, right? If you're manipulating miners.
Yeah, because, well, I mean, there is a threat there. Like you can reverse transactions within a certain time frame. You can cause damage, but the network is resilient. It's that damage will not be very long lasting. No, this guy right here, this is my Raspberry Pi high availability node. To your point directly, Corey, that's 5 Raspberry Pi nodes orchestrated together using Kubernetes. And if Raspberry Pi, like if the Raspberry Pi Foundation basically was infiltrated and they decided, oh, you know what? One of our primary use cases is for Bitcoin nodes. So we're going to put in a backdoor in the hardware for Raspberry Pis that basically says, oh, we recognize that a Bitcoin node is running on this Raspberry Pi, and we're going to, they usually use this particular consensus mechanism, 21 million Bitcoin. That's the standard mechanism. Well, if you're running on a Bitcoin or a Raspberry Pi node, if it has a backdoor, maybe some nefarious actor would want to change that backdoor, and that's the real threat. By the way, I made this node years ago. I do not recommend using Raspberry Pis as nodes anymore, but it's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, Corey,
That's what I mean with the node. That's the backdoor that could
that's
actually
the real
infiltrate
threat,
a significant number of nodes. Feels like the real threat.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that all would come down to the silicon, though, right? Is what the thing, the brain of the node is the silicon, and that is the key here. Is the centralization risk outside of the ASIC construction is the actual CPU or SoC, software on a chip or system on a chip, infrastructure, like hardware infrastructure that would cause these issues. Because if you build your hardware in such a way that it sees a Bitcoin transaction coming and it just basically flushes that out, they flip a switch and it's like, cool, now all nodes that were manufactured or that exist outside of China essentially just flush Bitcoin transactions. Now we're going to get into an issue. Now, again, we're getting over my head when it comes to actually how some of this technical stuff works, but the TLDR is the centralization, though, is the risk. And so the question comes in, do you guys ever see manufacturing coming back to LA? You guys see this? Like, that's been actually one of my hopes for a long time is seeing this become,
Big yes.
yeah, that's what I'm hoping. But
I mean, it's going to be difficult. And then before I answer, I want to hear Anton answer.
Well, I'm not trying to change the subject. I love talking about this stuff, but I do want to bring up another thing. Do you guys remember in the late 90s to early 2000s? I guess actually even before that, because we're all about the same age. Do you guys remember Circuit City or Fry's Electronics?
Oh yeah.
And you go there and you look at the latest Sony little, what are those things called? The little flip computer things.
the Vizio or the PSP?
Yeah, but what do they call that device? Where it's like a little mini computer that everybody used.
Oh, the Pocket PC type things.
Yeah, there was a word for it.
Yep.
They're always coming out with new hardware that was really cool, that had different features. And now when we think of hardware, we think of a black screen, a black mirror. And something that I think a lot of Bitcoiners get excited about, have gotten excited about as people become Bitcoiners, is all of the weird hardware that's involved with Bitcoin. You have hardware wallets, like there were ledgers, Trezors, Cold Card, Cypherpunk-ism has this hardware aspect to it. And maybe that changes in the future, but if you've ever mined, if you've run GPU mining, or if you've had ASICs, there's a lot of different hardware that's used for it. And in the future, if we're using Bitcoin as money, there's a lot of different ways that we can interact with the world. Like Bondor and I were talking about before we went on stream, the tap card that people are using for Lightning in Costa Rica. There's all this cool gadgetry, and people have to make that gadgetry. And so I'm just saying there's a big opportunity for people to manufacture actual products again. And so will manufacturing come back to LA? I think it already is starting to do that on a small scale. The fact that a Cold Card, this is in LA, but the fact that a Cold Card is made in Canada as opposed to China, maybe some of the electronics are Chinese components, but it's assembled in Canada. It says made in Canada on the device. And, I'm just trying to imagine what that's going to be like in the future. Are there going to be things that are made in the USA that are these weird hardware devices that we use to interact with Bitcoin? I think probably there will be.
NVK, who makes the Cold Card, actually posted about this to a degree. I believe some of their hardware circuitry is made in China. If I remember the tweet specifically, but I could be wrong on that. So NVK or anybody, if you're watching, please correct me on that. But yeah, the issue, regardless, though, is
with apologies to NVK.
Yeah,
right.
I'll try and find out. I was trying to read. I couldn't remember, though. Maybe his thing was saying that making in China is the problem. But I think the tweet, though, that was more specific was China does have the largest, in the same way we have brain drain for like software engineers from India. They have the largest brain drain of really high value, like insight and understanding silicon manufacturing. Like, we just don't have that. All of that goes over to China because they have the plants. Because like to drop a silicone plant, I believe it's like a 15-year venture and $2 billion before you're even like turning it on to make it work, kind of thing.
And we have no incentive to do it right now because you have cheap labor, cheap manufacturing. The infrastructure is over there right now. The incentive is going to be, if trade wars heat up, turn into real wars, and all of a sudden you can't get the silicone, the value of Bitcoin's going up. People want to mine Bitcoin. We're going to have a massive incentive to make new, bigger, faster, more energy efficient ASICs and have them in the United States as an actual race to mine Bitcoin starts to take place. That gets really feverish. I mean, they're already firing up nuclear power plants to run what are essentially data facilities so that they can run
HPC, high performance computing is what they call it.
Mm-hmm.
For AI.
As soon as it was financially viable, to underwrite an AI, we figured out climate change. We figured out cheap energy.
Oh, climate change, not a problem anymore.
Fantastic.
The whole time,
the climate changed. It's better now.
It's the densest form of energy we've ever discovered. Yeah, it was that one. Who knew?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's interesting. There's a lot of just power and all the things.
So in terms of LA, I mean, Corey and JD, you guys were both did an entire episode about the studio space in LA and how the entire industry of Hollywood is essentially bifurcating and turning into a distributed storytelling device internationally, right? Historically, all of that industry took place in LA, and historically, to produce movies, you needed unbelievable amounts of space, right? Warehouses on warehouses next to warehouses. Like, so much of that space today, I imagine, and Corey, you probably have better numbers on this than I do. I don't have any numbers. So much of that space largely goes unused because the productions are not shooting here in LA. Consequently,
That's true.
and you just drive through the city of industry. It is warehouse after warehouse. You can like pull up Google Maps and like look at the east side of LA. It is huge. Big box. I actually had an internship at a big box commercial real estate firm in college, and we just drive around and look at all these like massive warehouses. Most of that, back when I was in college, was utilized for distribution. It was you unload your trucks, you unload your shipping containers. It sits in the warehouse and then it's shipped to the rest of the country because LA is the biggest port on the West Coast. Now, what does that look like in terms of retooling the economy, right? Like LA has this incredible already connected infrastructure. Does it have the whatever 10 square mile manufacturing things that China has? No. But we have all of this infrastructure that's already there, ready to go. And it's really fascinating to think like, well, geez, if you start switching the levers of the incentives in the political landscape, and like all of this stuff can come back pretty quickly. I mean, there's a whole ramp up of difficulty with bringing manufacturing online, but the space is there, the infrastructure is there, at least enough.
Space.
Yeah, enough infrastructure and enough like way to get it like to, okay, cool, we got our foot in the door. Now we can get to the next level, right? Proof of concept kind of stuff.
For sure. I still think the space is so much more expensive even than going to like the desert in Nevada or like outside of Phoenix, right? Where within a drive you can get to so much empty land where you could I think the space isn't the issue. I think it's not coming back to LA manufacturing at all due respect to the trade war, because when China becomes non-viable, there will be 100 other countries that want to do it, and they can still do it a tenth of the cost because our labor costs are too high. And I don't know how we're getting around our labor costs being too high. It's I don't know how you put the toothpaste back in that tube. But that to me, it's the same
you just
thing
need a deflationary currency.
media.
That's fine. We've got that taken care of. But
We could do that. We
Yeah.
could do that.
That was actually one of the biggest things that orange pilled me from BTC Pins, talking with him down at his meetup when I first became a Bitcoiner, and he kind of explained to me the deflation of job titles. And so what he means by that is, if you're a really damn good writer, it doesn't matter where you are. You're going to be able to write and you're going to get paid the same as somebody else, regardless of where you are in the world. And AI is going to make that even more true, because at the end of the day, and this kind of goes to what you were talking about in the last pod, Anton, where it's like you can put your books from your taxes into this AI and it'll tell you exactly how much money that you owe. So you're not going to need to go to a person. You can literally just use this AI. And so then what you're going to actually be paying for is, it's like the job costs, I'm going to use Bitcoin at $1 million. So it's like the job costs 1,000 sats a day, or whatever it is, or 1,000 sats an hour. But what you'll pay extra for is, what I want somebody closer to me. Okay, so like the premium on somebody closer to me is like 250 sats or whatever it is an hour. And then the premium on Corey's take on it is going to be another 300. So like I might pay, like the standard for chipset manufacturing person A is 1,000, but if I want them closer to me, I'll pay a premium for that. If I want Corey's specific take, I'll pay a little bit of a premium on that. And so it's like everybody kind of knows what the rates are, globally because everything's just settling on chain or on L2s or whatever. But the skill set is what you pay for, and then like the bonuses of like, okay, how close to me are you? How close to manufacturing are you? Da, 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 da.
I remember
grade
back in the early 2000s, there was this director. He was like a commercial director, and he lived in the suburbs in North Texas. And everybody was like, he's not legitimate. He lives in the suburbs. And you had to live in downtown Dallas to be legitimate in the commercial industry. Now, if you have an Instagram and it looks really good, you're legitimate, and nobody gives a crap where you live, and you get paid the same amount. And I'm witnessing this in my own industry. I'm a cinematographer by trade. And I know there's a guy who lives in Iowa who is really in demand. He just loves Iowa. It's where he was born and raised. It's where he lives. He gets paid more than I do for doing work. He just flies wherever he's going to go. And so, yeah, it is a little less important when it comes to job titles where you physically are anymore. Not only because things are so online, but also just because the ease of travel is you can just go anywhere. Yesterday, I had a job in Phoenix. I literally flew from LAX to Phoenix and back same day. I commuted to Phoenix for the job. It was no problem.
And this kind of, in terms of manufacturing, this really gets interesting because of 3D printing. How much is it necessary to do I got to manufacture this part, this teeny little plastic piece in Chile, and I got to ship it to China to be assembled, and then it's got to go through here and there. And it's like, why don't we just print the piece with, and not just like silly plastic parts, but like the legitimate hardcore 3D printed metal like pieces that you like really specified high grade stuff that you can, we just bought the printer, and as people realize you can do this, the cost of the printers come down and like the whole thing. Wait a second, we don't like, what kind of scale are we looking at here? And then all of that, again, to Zach's point on the pod you guys did, bro, it's all being distributed. All of it is decentralized now, right? All the manufacturing, like 90% or 94% of manufacturing takes place in China. 99% of the chip manufacturing, there's going to be some other place where it makes more sense. And then there's going to be another place where it makes more sense. And as we push the limits of, how close we can go to the physical limits of reality, as we get closer to those, well, then the economies of scale are going to say like, well, anybody who wants to manufacture ASICs, they can just do that. Right now we're at the stage where it's like anybody who wants to run a miner in their home, they can just do that, which is cool. But like you start to unravel this a little bit further and push a little bit harder on the same logic. It's anybody who wants to have a ASIC manufacturer in their home can do that. That's decades away probably, but it's still like that's the direction we're headed. It's crazy to think about that.
Yeah.
Tesla has done that to some degree. So Tesla gets talked about as being the largest manufacturer of US made cars with US manufactured parts. But Tesla also has a factory in China where they make cars that are made in China, but the cars look the same. If you take a Model Y in China and a Model Y in the United States, they look the same. One is made in China, one is made in the US. And it makes sense because they have a robotic arm that is programmed to make the car. You just put the raw materials into, at some point, this is not exactly how it's done now, but at some point you just put the raw materials in a computer program, and a robotic arm just assembles the thing. And you can have multiple assembly plants in multiple places all over the world making the same stuff.
You hit on one unique thing there, Anton, too, on the raw material transformation into the thing. Because Tesla's actually doing that exact thing. I've heard Elon and a couple other people talk on that. Is the other issue is the raw material manufacturing process, where it's like actually making the silicone that you need to actually, like the silicone wafers and manufacturing those into like creation and existence type thing. that I think is also another thing that's like, regardless of who can actually do the printing on the chips, because it's like once you make the chip, then you have to like do all the laser etching and everything on the actual wafer. But it's like turning the raw silica and everything else like that into the actual wafers is also another completely centralized thing that Tesla's doing a good job of starting to, distribute and make. I think also some chips are manufactured in Mexico. But yeah, it's I agree with you, Corey, that it's going to be hard pressed to get that stuff here, but I'm going to hold.
I mean,
out
it's
hope.
certainly possible. I just think that we had like the wave of globalization basically since the 90s was multinational companies dodging taxes and finding the cheapest place to make their goods. And all of that works when America's the most powerful. We spend half of the naval spending in the world is American. And that's not by coincidence. That's because our shipping lines are perfect and they're protected. And there's absolutely no difference to an American multinational company whether something is fabricated in Cambodia or Vietnam or China or the middle, the middle of the country, middle of America. And that's been true. Like those assumptions have been true for all this time. And it feels like those assumptions are starting to unwind. And we're saying it's not possible. It can't happen. But it's just not as financially viable as if the world was as peaceful as it was in 1992, which basically just moves the supply demand curve a little bit, and probably makes goods generally quite a bit more expensive.
Actually curious on your take on this, Corey, because I think you might know more about it, but can you unpack a little bit about the like rise and fall of Japan during the 90s and kind of like, because I'm curious, because like I'm on a Japanese camera right now. I think most of you guys are on Japanese cameras right now. It's like they have really good optics. Like they still have that thing that they own, like optics anywhere in the world. If you're going to get lenses or whatever, you might have Leica, which is I think German, but like for the most part, you're using like, Canon, Nikon, Sony. All these are Japanese optics to a degree, or Korea. But like what kind of happened there? What kind of happened there? Can you kind of?
I'm definitely not a scholar on this. My dad taught a lot of this. He's a supply chain like business school professor about supply chains and ops management and inventory management and all that. But I mean, Japan just dominated innovation. There aren't that many countries in the world where innovation is really protected. And we talk about most of the countries in the world being capitalist, but in most of the countries, if you start a company and it's successful, the government can just take it from you. That's true in China. So the best Chinese entrepreneurs come to America. The best entrepreneurs anywhere come to America. It's basically for the past 50 years, Brazil's okay. Japan's very good. Germany's very good. America's very good in terms of actually protecting IP. So places that really fostered innovation, there's only a handful of places, and they pulled, America mostly pulled the entrepreneurs from around the world because they want to capitalize on their own value. Japan did that really well. I think the way that they've tapered off is genuinely just massive population issue. They have an incredibly aging population. They didn't value children at all. They didn't value family at all. And there's this mix of this new world, old world that's led to this population bomb that's blown up and is an enormous issue for them. That to me genuinely is by far their biggest issue, not a lack of interest in innovation or a lack of interest in being a part of the world economy. They just didn't have kids. It's pretty straightforward. They should have been a power player of the past 10 years.
Well, longer than that, the power player of the last like 90s, 2000s. I forget when was the book made. Like there's a famous book on this called Japan on Top. And if somebody wants to like fact check me on when Japan on Top was released, but it basically marked the top. The thesis of the book was like Japan's manufacturing, their culture, their innovation, their like every single thing basically says that Japan is going to be the leader going into the future. And when that book was published, that marked the top of Japan.
That's a real Jim Cramer call. Can you imagine being like a Japanese inventor at the time? Like, come on.
Yeah. So, I mean, the results of that, like from that point, like that was the height of the, unless my history is incorrect, but that was the height of the Nike, however you pronounce it, like their stock market, which
Nikkei index.
The Nikkei index.
That was the height of their stock market. peaked, and
Yeah.
it didn't return to those peaks until like the last month, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
It was over 30 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been such a big,
It's been a
like,
long,
huge,
it's been a
like,
long, slow decline.
unbelievable
Yeah.
long road. Yeah.
It-
Not
yeah.
the last 10 years, the last 30 years. Like it's just
Yeah. No, it's really
something,
true.
like,
I just
the
have thought of
demographics in
them.
Japan just crazy. Yeah.
It's been within my adult life that they've been a relevant player in tech and hardware and
Yeah.
and innovation, but in decreasingly so. And I didn't actually realize when that Japanese carry trade blew up, I didn't realize how much foreign investment was propping up their currency. That was incredible. I didn't realize the volume behind that trade, but it's a pretty savvy move by them for a long time.
Yep.
Get an
Yeah.
enormous amount of foreign investment by basically just giving it away for free.
Anton,
Yeah.
can you unpack,
I'll be
because
right
I think you're really close to this, but like the cultural context and what because again, going back to hardware manufacturing and then like Japan with the lack of care for families, but like can you unpack the cultural context, because I think you have successfully tapped into cultural zeitgeist twice, but like how do you see us pulling out of this tailspin? Can we?
Well, yeah, the way that I see us pulling out of the cultural tailspin is essentially they're probably going to have to get worse, and there's going to have to be some sort of collapse. And at the exact same time, the timing's not going to be perfect, but there's going to be a point where Bitcoin essentially decouples, becomes incredibly valuable. And then the people like us, frankly, who are Bitcoiners, are going to have a lot of, for lack of a better word, it's going to be a lot of power to deploy the capital we have to do the things that we want to do. At the same time, as that's happening, even people who haven't been Bitcoiners they're essentially going to buy Bitcoin. They're going to see the value of their own money growing. It's going to slow down their spending a little bit because they're not going to want to spend money that is growing in value. Essentially, they're going to be investing in Bitcoin as well. How we get there, I don't know. I don't see things going in a positive direction for a long time. Like Bondar was asking if manufacturing is going to come back to LA, or maybe it was you, JD. Things are so bad from a regulatory standpoint here. There are so many laws on the books that make it so hard to do any kind of business here. The taxation, the fees, you're essentially punished for succeeding here, and it just drives out anybody who's doing innovation.
Punished for even participating here. Whether or
Yeah.
not you succeed, you're punished for participating.
Yeah. If you obey the laws here, you get punished for it. If you completely break the laws, it's a free-for-all. You can do whatever you want. But if you know business at all, being ethical is the way that you succeed in business. Being wildly unethical, let's say you're a drug dealer or you're a mafia or whatever, there are consequences for not doing things ethically. But if the environment is so punishing from a regulatory standpoint, and essentially people vote for this stuff, it makes the cost of living too expensive. It makes the cost of doing business too expensive. And so even though we have all of this infrastructure here in a place like California, which is like the Shangri-La of the world, this should be the best place ever, it's hard to do any kind of business here. So that stuff has to massively fail to a degree to where the mentalities of the type of people that come here have to then want to change the systems, and those systems don't just change overnight. They take a long time. And so I don't know how all that shakes out. Yeah, go ahead.
Here's an interesting take on it. This is just a new thought, so shoot it down if there's nothing there. But there's a theory. You have to have heard of this theory. If you haven't, I'll explain it. But if you haven't, tell me if you haven't. Which is the nothing ever happens theory. Have you heard of this?
I don't think so.
So the nothing ever happens theory, and you go look it up because I'm going to butcher it right now, but it's this idea that like nothing ever happens. Oh, well, there's this emergency, but then there's administrators that exist to handle the emergency. And so the emergency is handled, and the results of the emergency is that, well, nothing really ever happens because it was all just taken care of. So, and it applies in these really weird ways, and you can apply like, I first had this thought like in Trump's first term of president, when they're basically saying like the mainstream media is essentially saying we're going to enter World War III because Iran is going to send some nukes over here. We're sending nukes to Iran. This is happening this week. This is like a month before COVID, something like that, right? But then the administrators got involved and they realized, well, this isn't and the negotiations. Nothing really happened. Nothing. There was no World War III. Now, some things do happen, obviously, with COVID, but to bring it home to the point that Anton's making, or not to the point that Anton's making, but to have a further thought about it, the state of the world as it is right now is the nothing ever happens world, right? When people say things are going to get a lot worse, well, maybe they get a lot worse, but there's all these, like, we have this insane administration state that basically just quote unquote manages all of these things. Like, oh, it's going to get so much worse, but then there's like 1,000 people employed to handle that particular problem. It's this weird, unbelievable, weird fiat world dynamic, right? So nothing, it's always a little bit worse, but it's never catastrophic. It's like the riots. Oh, there's so many riots, but wow, we have all of the riot gear already. It's like these weird dynamics of, but this is not really a problem. I mean, you know, again, real disasters really happen, which is the fires here in LA burned down a whole bunch of people and burned down a whole bunch of buildings, and a whole bunch of people lost their entire existence, right? But like, what's changing from that? Like, literally nothing is changing. The entire administration state has completely just dug in their heels more. Like, oh well, we're gonna, you know, we got all the consulting firms working on bringing people the permits so they can rebuild their homes. But like, what is it? The Palisades have approved permits for like less than 10 homes or something. It's like no.
It's actually more than I thought.
It's like none of this is none of these problems are like, none of the disasters actually result in anything changing. I think that's what I'm trying to get at. So when people say things are getting a lot, like it's got to get a lot worse, I'm sitting here and I'm like, well, it's never going to get a lot worse. It's always going to get a little bit worse. It never goes all the way, but it always gets a little bit worse, right? But that's just the incentives of fiat. So I don't know, just throwing that out there. Curious about your thoughts on that, because it ties back into, Anton, what you're saying, like, yeah, things got to get a lot worse for people to wake up. And I'm just sitting there thinking, no, things never get that much worse. It's like, yeah, some people's lives, like, bad things happen, but at a large scale, the last worst thing to happen in the last 20 years, there's basically two things, or maybe three things, which is 9/11, 30 years, COVID, BLM, GFC, 4 things, right? And what are the results of that? How much of your lives have changed because of those things? To me, it feels like I'm kind of living in this weird twilight zone where it just kind of goes on. It's like, it just kind of goes on. There's the ongoing joke. Yeah, we're still in March of 2020.
That's Groundhog Day.
Nothing is,
It's literally Groundhog Day.
Nothing has changed since the shutdown. It's just the same thing over and over again. Anyway, the point here is that, like, I don't necessarily think things need to get a lot worse for people to change. I think it's actually just an intellectual switch. I think it's wait a second, we just push on Bitcoin more. We explain Bitcoin more. We actually, like, take the time to, like, really try and change people's minds intellectually about this stuff. Go through the logic and see that the logic is sound. Do you agree or disagree with the logic? And go from there. I don't think necessarily that it's this, like, catastrophic end times kind of thing. Anyway, okay, all done.
Can I just say one thing on that? And that's very positive. It's a very optimistic way of looking at things, and that's good. Optimism it's important to feel optimistic so that you continue and you take steps forward in your life. One thing that's also optimistic is you can say, well, one thing that hasn't changed is Bitcoin hasn't changed. for the last 10 years, it's just continued running, and nothing ever changes. And one day to the next, like there's not that big of dramatic changes. And even for us as Bitcoiners, and yet if you look at the price of Bitcoin 10 years ago compared to today, it's gone essentially 100x. So nothing has changed. And yet over 10 years, if you have been investing into studying Bitcoin and investing your actual money into Bitcoin, the money that you've invested, I mean, wouldn't have 100x unless you put all of it in 10 years ago. But if you've been dollar cost averaging, you've been seeing your purchasing power increasing during that entire time. Whereas if you were saving dollars, you've seen your purchasing power decreasing that entire time. So nothing ever changes, but at the same time, you get to choose at this point what does change for you over time.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Nothing ever changes for everybody all at once. But things you get to, in the whole social media, like I live in a silo. I can just choose what all of my inputs are, and nobody else has the same inputs. All of your stuff, you get to essentially choose what things you want. This is like a very like Christian concept too, which is the idea like, oh, well, the C.S. Lewis version of hell. Well, hell is just, you just get what you finally want. Like that's what hell is, because bro, if you just wanted the big house and that was you lived your entire life and then you die and like that was your God, your big house. Well, you get your big house in hell. Great. Have fun with your big house, man, for eternity. And there's nothing else that you can get, just the big house. Right.
It's interesting. I'm using Grok to look up some Bible verses. So if the Bible verses are wrong, blame Grok. So I'm not quite checking.
I do a lot of theological inquiry to Grok too.
But it's interesting. The whole nothing ever changes theory is actually biblical to a degree. Ecclesiastes 1:9 and 10 is the ESV.
Nothing new.
But literally, what has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there's nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which is said, see, this is new? It has already been in the ages before us. So literally, that is it. Nothing ever changes is biblical in that sense. It's interesting because that was actually one of the things that, if you think about it, you have an idea, and this is, LA is so litigious. And what's one of the first things I learned when I got here was just how litigious, i.e. suing everybody, it is. And it's like the number of people like, you stole my idea, you did my thing, you do whatever. And it's just so interesting. It's like there are, 7 billion people on the face of the planet. Outside of the fact that your DNA and you occupying a specific space at a specific time will be completely unique. Like that just will be. But completely unique ideas, I think, are very, very uncommon. Bitcoin was one of those things, and everybody recognizes them when you see them, right? Because Bitcoin is an amalgamation of a lot of ideas, but like the execution is the thing. If you guys know who Bitcoin mechanics,
people recognize them as something new, but also people absolutely reject, like full-heartedly, get out of here, etc. Like that's another sign that it's an actual new idea, because people are like so against it.
Yeah, well, I mean, heliocentric versus geocentric in terms of like
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Solid point.
Love that point.
I feel like AI is like that. Like things that
JD on the point.
You're good.
Things that people are Luddites for. JD, we didn't hear anything what you just said for the last.
It was nothing important.
He's gonna sue us. It's very litigious.
Yes.
What were you saying about AI, Anton?
Well, just you're saying how you have something really innovative is if some people accept it and some people hard reject it. AI is one of those things. We were talking about just now using AI to essentially do theology research. I mentioned this to somebody recently, and he just thought that idea was abhorrent. And I was like, what I used it for was, there was a particular character in the Bible who was mentioned in all these different books. And I was like, you can have Grok put all the verses chronologically for you so that you can just see them. It's a nice study tool if you're interested in this character. For me, this character happened to be John the Baptist. And he just immediately didn't trust this. And I was like, well, I mean, you can check the work. Like the AI doesn't have any incentive to lie to you about this. You're not You're not, asking the AI, something that's going to make you like reject your faith. You're just doing this objective research. And that's just Ludditism.
Yeah, this goes into actually one of the things I know Bondor and I have talked about at different periods of time, where it's like the value of the work going into something, like the garbage in, garbage out concept of stuff. And this goes into like a greater concept of like the future of work that he sees, I would love to see, which I'd love to talk about in a different episode, but I'm not going to open up your kind of worms. But it's just the the trust is going to be the key. Trust is the currency of the future, period. Right now I'm working with some people and I'm like thinking like, oh, I don't have like a proper contract in place with this person yet. And sometimes that just happens. And even just in entertainment in general, it's just a traditional thing is like, hey, are you free Thursday to work? You don't know anything about these people. It's literally just, cool, can you come be a gaffer or be a DP or be whatever? And then people show up and they do work for you, and then they expect you to pay them, and they want you to pay them, and you should pay them. But the thing is, it's like LA and entertainment are one of the few remaining completely handshake businesses in a lot of ways, that I think actually will be the way of the future. Just like if you guys know the story of Sriracha, for until like 2016, Sriracha, all of the chilies were grown by a farmer that just had a handshake deal with the guy who founded Sriracha. Literally, it's it. He just was like, hey man, you grow these chilies, I'll pay you. And the guy's like, cool. And he just basically kept sending the chilies, and the guy kept paying him and kept going back and forth. And that's it. They're like, where's the contract? We don't have a contract. It's just a handshake deal. So it's just wild. But I think that's going to be actually the future. And
hard agree.
Well, we've talked about, well, first of all, please don't talk about food anymore. Some of us are fasting for Good Friday, and we're very observant. Secondly, we talked about the return to the trust economy, where the less that you can trust what's happening digitally, the more you have to trust in the way that humans have always trusted, which is the people that are right in front of them and the people that are right around them, people that they know and have history with. And we've substituted that trust for this digital presence. And we gave it to things like news organizations and politicians and big churches. But those are things we don't know at all. And we just feel like we do. And I think as that digital trust moves away, the new trust economy will just return to what it was before. And we'll look back on this as an odd little blip where it was really easy to capture people with propaganda using this digital thing that for some reason we all had this implicit trust in.
Yeah. And honestly, I think Bitcoin plays a huge role in that, because
huge role.
Like just at the extremely basic level. Oh, if I am custodying my own Bitcoin and I have my own private key, holy shit, do I have my private key on my computer, but now I'm questioning whether or not I trust my computer at all. Right. And like, wow. Right. Like, that's just my computer. Now let's talk about the web browser that's on my computer. Do I trust that? Okay, cool. Let's talk about whether or not I trust the website that's on my web browser that's on my computer. And you just like the whole thing going back to the very top of the conversation. And all of this runs on a microchip. Do I trust that? Right? Like the hardware itself. Can I trust that? And you really start to get into things like, and Bitcoin basically calls all of that out. It says, well, maybe you can, but like, you probably shouldn't. And then you just go down that rabbit hole of like, no, I don't trust that. I don't trust that. I don't trust that. And then all of a sudden, Corey, to your point, the things that matter the most in everyone's life are the real life in-person relationships they have. The handshake is way more important than any legal document or DocuSign BS signature that you could ever create. Your handshake, you look at somebody in the eye and you shake their hand, that's the deal you're getting. And if it's not, then like, I'm not interacting with this person ever again. Their reputation, they're dead to me. Like that kind of, it's like it's a different playing field for all of civilization. And it's awesome because it's real. It's like the way God designed humanity to interact with itself.
Yep.
It's incredible.
Yeah. Now, I will say when that was more the norm, xenophobia was also just the assumed interaction between cultures. Do you think we see a rise of that as we go back to that?
I think you have to define xenophobia, because I think we're going to get into I think you'd have to define it.
It's probably a whole different podcast, but it's an interesting thing, right? The globalization did lead to peace among cultures in a way that we haven't really seen before. We start to get rid of that. Do you think we?
That was very temporary.
The
social
it feels very
signals.
temporary right now. Yeah.
Yeah,
It feels like we're getting
social
back
signals.
to Babel. Like Babel's happening again,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
I would love to talk about that on another episode. I have
That'd be
so
a fun
many,
topic.
so many thoughts on
That'd be
that.
a fun topic.
Do you guys have any? Because we're kind of coming up on the hour. So what are some last thoughts? I'll give my 2 seconds, which is we need to start building our own stuff. That's it. And so I
Yes.
think it's the most valuable and important thing we can do as a country, and not just the United States. Everybody, if you live in Germany, you should make your own chips. If you live in France, you should make your own chips. And this goes back to the things you should be making, not just hardware. You should be making your own culture. Like, you should be requiring people to assimilate to your culture. If you're in Italy, you are Italian.
Yeah.
If you're in
Yep.
Ethiopia, you become Ethiopian, because we as humans are called to be in tribes. That doesn't mean you can't have people in, right? You can't be a melting pot, but you are American, period. And so I think it's really, really important actually to not, ignore your differences. You should actually celebrate them, and you should move forward in them. And I think that's the problem is, So
Yeah, real tangible things that you can feel are very, very important. For years, we have had things go streaming, and now we're meeting together, even though we're all in the same city, we're meeting together virtually. But
Hopefully one day in person.
yeah, we should do
Soon.
one of these in person.
so
If you think about what we ate as children, it was absolute garbage, and we didn't realize, because there was this convenience. All of a sudden we had packaged food, we had cereals. We didn't even notice when the grains we were eating started becoming horrible, filled with pesticides. We didn't even notice when the Coca-Cola we were drinking started to have high fructose corn syrup, or the potato chips that we're eating, or the McDonald's French fries went from being made with beef tallow to being made with seed oils. So being able to make your own things applies to everything. Like, we still live in a physical world, and somehow this digital currency that, it's not just a digital currency, but this thing, Bitcoin, that's united us and got us all thinking on this same thing, even though it's digital, has started making us reconsider how we interact in the physical world, and the importance of the actual physical things, our actual physical relationships that we have, the things that we put in our bodies. It's all interrelated somehow.
Yep. The one thing that comes to mind, so there's a 1970 novel by Larry Niven called Ringworld. And Corey, you got to read the whole series. I don't know if you've heard of this series. Have you? Okay. Go sit down. There's the original Ringworlds, and then there's like the extended Ringworlds. You got to read the whole extended series. It's some of the best sci-fi that's out there. Not without its faults, ridiculous in some capacities, but there's one thing that I thought was interesting. Larry Niven envisions a future for Earth, where Earth is essentially this homogenous, all cultures are 100% the same. And, it's a result of the technologies that they have and all this other stuff. And interacting and listening to you guys talk about this, and like looking at Bitcoin, I'm like, bro, that's so off. The thing that's going to like make humanity like humanity is the uniqueness of every single culture, and how we all dig into our own personal cultures and own local identities. Like, maybe we get teleportation where we can like literally travel across the world in a second. That'd be awesome. Great. But like, yeah, but that's not me, like it's great to go to Japan and interact with Japan and consume the incredible quality that Japan is able to produce. But like, and speaking as somebody who's lived in South Korea, it's like, yeah, that's all amazing, but like, it's not me. It's not my culture. It's not my people. It's not, and maybe there's xenophobia in there. I really don't think so. Cause I love all the people. Like, this is incredible, but like, they're not my people. Right. So I don't know. I just look at that. I'm like, no, like it always like rung false with me. Like, this is not the beauty, the depth of humanity that really is out there.
It immediately makes me think of the Tower of Babel, which is thought of as this prideful act of humans, and there is pride in it, but God doesn't frustrate it because they're going to fail to act like God. He frustrates it because he says, for them, nothing will be impossible, right? They're going to deliver the promise of earth without going forth and multiplying. They're going to ignore the first command and to deliver what I want them to do, but without actually becoming all of what humanity's supposed to be. And it's an interesting thing with sci-fi. C.S. Lewis does it in That Hideous Strength as well, where there's a group of people who I now think are extinctionists, but communist also works, who want the world to go back to complete homogeneity, right? They want the world to be
the World
one.
Economic Forum. This podcast.
The World Economic Forum is also a
Thanks for getting us banned.
great word for them. Yeah, exactly. But then there's people on the other side who want humanity to grow in individuality and connection across community and university, right? As you want those cultures to come together in a way that cherishes each other. And as Christians, we say that every person reflects God differently. So that every human life has the opportunity to bring something to the world, to the kingdom of God. Literally every single life has something that no other life will ever have in terms of reflecting God, because it lands on an individual fingerprint. And that should be really encouraging. And I would love it if our economy and our hardware, this is such a cheap way to bring this back around, but if story did that, if culture did that, if architecture did that, if hardware did that, right? If the things that we bought and the way that we interacted with the world was also reflected the individuality and beauty of humanity, that would be way better. So things are going to get more expensive because we're not in 1992 globalized free trade. But I think that was fake. I think that was a fiat driven fake peace, like similar to the euro. Like, let's just make a policy that pretends that we're all friends with each other. Is it a good policy? No, but it'll be nice. Won't that feel nice, right? And now they have this terrible currency that's lost most of its value since it was incepted.
Yeah.
The fake stuff dies. The individual stuff, the stuff that's real, that stuff that's actually driven by humans.
Yeah, we get back to artisanal aspects of things, but we get back to real value and pride in your work. And I say this as somebody who, our air conditioner just died, but we went back and looked at it, and our air conditioner's from 1994. And so it's like 31 years on an AC is wild, actually. And so, because those are usually like 20-year units. But it's one of those things, like, we're going to get back to that. We're going to get to a place where it's like you have a 50-year refrigerator, right? It's going to cost you $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, whatever it is. But it's going to last you half a generation. You're going to use the same fridge as your kids and their kids, and it's going to be...
And it's going to be manufactured locally in your neighborhood.
Probably in your neighbor's garage, because it's going to be 3D printed, and then your other neighbor's going to make the chip.
And if it breaks, you're going to be able to fix it yourself.
Yes. Yeah. So cool. Any other closing thoughts? But I'm stoked, guys. Thanks for
I love that.
Hanging. Yep, good stuff. Interesting.
All right,
who's gonna say it? Better buy Bitcoin.
Better buy Bitcoin.
Got a good thing coming, and it's all I need.